Hey guys, good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. This video is my opinion and shall not be used for financial advice. Let's do a quick review on everything. We have quite a few newbies. Okay, so back in 2014, the CBI said they're going to hold off on deleting the three zeros, meaning increase the exchange rate, for a period of 5 years. They said the main reason why was they were seeking political stability for Iraq. Iraq needed to have their elections and finish the formation of the government and get rid of all the corrupt political figures. Okay, so now we advance to 19. Let's look at the 19 facts to see if there's supporting evidence that deletion of the zeros for 5 years stands true. Okay, so here's the facts. At the beginning of 19, they released budget articles for the year of 2019, and they told us that the HCL and Article 140 had monies allocated within the 19 budget. Those are post-RI monies. Okay, so based on that, they're suggesting to us they have intentions of increasing the exchange rate during the year of 2019. But let's look at their actions. Let's see what they've done to see if there's supporting evidence of that. Okay, well, January through June, they negotiated and put in place reconstruction agreements. Okay, they also went ahead and put in trade agreements with other countries. So right there, what they've done is they've actually set the stage for the rate change for the country of Iraq. Okay, what about the citizens? Well, so January to June was for the setting the stage for the country for after the rate change. Going into July, within July, what they did was they started to set the stage in preparations to get Article 140 and the HCL resolved with the Kurdistan region to set the stage for purchase power for the citizens of Iraq. Okay, and then so what they're telling us is that they were setting the stage for Iraq from the period of January through the end of August. Okay, but back in 2014, the CBI told us they were seeking political stability before they would even delete the zeros. That's where September comes in. They're currently telling us in the news that their current goal is to finish the formation of the government, which is the linchpin. Finish the formation of the government during the period sometime in September. That's their goal. We'll see how that plays out. Okay, what other supporting evidence is there? Well, okay, so they're telling us they want to finish the formation of the government in September. Just a week and a half ago, Kuwait released all of the reconstruction funds from the beginning of 18. Okay, so they've held on to it for a little over a year and a half. They just released it roughly a week and a half ago and gave those funds to Iraq in Q3, in the middle of Q3. And Iraq went ahead and they're creating their supplementary budget for the 2019 budget. They're creating a supplementary budget for that and adding 170 billion dinar to the 2019 budget. Okay, what that's going to do, and again, that's reconstruction money only for the Baghdad area. So now they have a whole bunch of brand new reconstruction money. Okay, and they've told us that some of that money is specifically for 19. Okay, so if it's for 19, how many quarters are left? One quarter. It's Q4. Well, okay, so with all that, so there's a whole bunch of movement of large amounts of money coming up, guys. We have to look at accounting periods on this. Okay, so when does the next accounting period start? On October 1st, the beginning of Q4. Okay, so the fact that they came into all this money in Q3, what they're doing, guys, is they're setting the stage now financially to prepare the reconstruction, which is a post-rate change event, because Iraq can only use one currency, the dinar, and that's why they haven't been able to pay for it since the war ended, because this is all post-war reconstruction. They came into the money in mid Q3 in preparation. They're setting the financial stage, guys, for Q4. So in my opinion, guys, they have to walk into Q4 with that money in hand. Okay, that's why they've set the linchpin for September. Okay, guys, the facts are so blatantly obvious right now. It's amazing. So, have a great day.
A delegation from the regional government visits Baghdad over the weekend to resolve outstanding issues. August 18, 2019 Walter release date. August 18, 2019 16:01. Baghdad. The talks between the federal government and the Kurdistan Regional Government, KRG, will resume this weekend, with several committees set up for this purpose. According to the information, the Kurdistan Regional Government identified its members in the legal and technical committees concerned with the negotiation with the federal government, and completed preparations to visit Baghdad this week for a dialogue on the settlement of differences between the two sides. A delegation from the Kurdistan region is scheduled to visit Baghdad this week, said Faiz Issa, head of the Kurdistan Regional Government, KRG, in Baghdad. During the previous meetings between Baghdad and Erbil, it was decided to form two committees, one legal and the other technical, to negotiate between the two sides, and is scheduled to hold the first round of talks in Baghdad. At the first meeting of the Kurdistan Regional Council of Ministers held in mid-July, emphasis was placed on improving relations with Baghdad. Kurdish delegation visits Baghdad to resolve the budget and oil. Baghdad Obelisk, the deputy of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan Bakhtiar Shah weighs on Sunday the two most important files to be carried by the delegation of the Kurdistan Regional Government of Iraq to Baghdad, which will visit in the coming days. Shawi said in a press statement that the two main files are the oil differences between Baghdad and Erbil, and the draft budget 2020. Noting that work is continuing to come an agreement and find an appropriate solution to these two files and other files, because the two parties agreed earlier to settle the differences instead of deepening them. He added, in the coming days before us a round of negotiations and the Kurdish delegation will visit Baghdad in order to reach a solution to the differences, and I think that the views between the parties are close. Equitable distribution of wealth. The ideas of this article are based on a vision that the country's money and wealth belong to its own people. The Constitution approved this for oil and gas in Article 111, which says, oil and gas is the property of all the Iraqi people in all regions and provinces. It is the duty of the state, among other things, to ensure the equitable distribution of wealth in society, and this is achieved through two basic mechanisms, work and need. On the basis of the work done by the citizen, he gets his share of public money. Therefore, the state strives to ensure that its employees or in the private sector receive fair, equitable and decent wages. It is this that called me to make great efforts to improve the conditions of workers in the Iraqi media network by increasing their salaries. And the same thing I did with artists and others in the many dramas produced by the network when I was president. Some have criticized me for the comfortable wages we paid to artists. My answer was that these are Iraqi citizens and this is one way to get a decent share of the wealth of their country through the artwork they do for the network. This is for those who are able to work, but those who are unable for various reasons, they get their share of the wealth of their country through the Social Protection Network or Social Security. The state should also address the situation of those suffering natural inequality. They are suffering from poverty and destitution for reasons beyond their means completely, while others enjoy the joys of life for reasons beyond their direct efforts. The Quran showed how to address this situation through the principle, those who have in their money a known right of the liquid and deprived. The second mechanism is to determine the share of the citizen of the public wealth, in light of the actual need to enjoy a decent life. A decent life may be a relative term that varies from one society to another, but in the present era, the outline or minimum has become known and shared. The need may arise because of the inability of the citizen to work at all, or because of his insufficient work to meet the needs of goods and services required by a minimum of decent life. In this case, the society, directly or through the state, to fill the needy, not out of charity and security, but out of the right of social solidarity. The state can devise various ways to help those in need. One of these methods is easy lending to these citizens. The needy citizen expects to receive a small loan from the state on concessional terms and nominal interest. This is the case in many countries. These days, government banks are announcing small loans to citizens working in the public sector and nationalizing their salaries in the banks that provide the loan. But I noticed that these banks carry a small loan with an interest rate of 40%. Under the pretext of easy repayment on a monthly basis, anyone who borrows 10 million dinars, for example, to buy a taxi to work on, will pay the state about 14 million dinars. This is undoubtedly a large sum and a heavy burden on a low-income citizen. The state would not have made such a move. This is a door in which he has mercy and his appearance by his torment. I know many of the citizens who reluctantly accepted this heavy burden because their need for little money is great, and the state simply and clearly exploit this need, obscene and contrary to the right of the public money when it needs it. Parliamentary planning, frozen balances are able to fill the 2020 budget deficit. The Parliamentary Strategic Planning Committee, on Saturday, that frozen funds and government banks are able to fill the federal budget deficit for 2020 without going towards external borrowing. Committee member Mohammed Karim said in a statement to the information that frozen funds inside government banks can solve the crisis of the expected deficit in the budget next year. Once allocated to projects, Karim added, the government can resort to internal funds to fill the budget deficit to avoid the rise of external debt owed by Iraq, noting that the deficit in the budget in 2020 hypothetical and can be overcome. Earlier, the Parliamentary Finance Committee revealed a large deficit in the budget of 2020 to reach $72 trillion. After a year characterized by prosperity was a deficit of $27 trillion speculative compared to what is expected next year. Legal clarifies the decision of the federal court on the entry into force of Article 140 of the Constitution 8-17-20190. Comments say legal expert explained the ruling of the federal Supreme Court on the entry into force of Article 140 of the Constitution, pointing out that the time limits stipulated in the Constitution include the obligation on the bodies responsible for the implementation of these articles, pointing out that the withdrawal of any text of the Constitution requires an amendment in accordance with official mechanisms. The ruling issued by the federal Supreme Court on the validity of Article 140 of the Constitution is true and binding on all authorities, said Muhammad Sharif. Sharif added that the abolition of any article of the Constitution requires an amendment in accordance with the mechanisms provided for in the Constitution itself. He pointed out that a number of questions are being asked about the federal Supreme Court's ruling on this article and the first of the timing of the issuance of this ruling, and why the judicial decision coincided with the political movement between the federal government and the Kurdistan region. Al-Sharif said, the court did not issue its verdict on its own, but this came upon an explanatory request received from the House of Representatives dated July 15, 2019, and therefore became necessary for the judiciary to decide. He continued, the timing must be asked by the interpreter, although the right of access to justice is guaranteed to everyone in accordance with Article 19.3 of the Constitution, and at any time, he added. The court issued its interpretative judgment a few days after receiving the request after it completed its study of all formal and substantive aspects with a view to issuing the verdict in it, on July 28, 2019. He stressed that when the court issued the verdict was in accordance with Article 92(2) of the Constitution, in accordance with its interpretative jurisdiction, which ruled in many judgments, including on the age of the electoral cycle and the largest parliamentary bloc and the opposition bloc and the unity of Iraq and territorial integrity. Al-Sharif stated that the explanatory request contained a clear inquiry which can be found in the form of Provision No. 71 Federal 2019, which is, kindly interpret the text of Article 140 of the Constitution as to whether or not it applies. Al-Sharif stressed that the explanatory applicant, the House of Representatives, limited his request to know whether this article is still valid or not, and the court, according to legal contexts, is obliged to answer that question whenever the correct formal and objective conditions for the request for interpretation and otherwise will put itself before responsibility to refrain from realizing the right. Al-Sharif stated that the pretext mentioned by the objectors in criticizing the ruling of the federal Supreme Court is the existence of a time limit in Article 140 of the Constitution is December 31, 2007, a maximum to implement them. He added that resolving the issue requires a return to the philosophy of the existence of time limits in the constitutional articles, is that exceeding them is the birthplace of those articles. Sharif pointed out that the examination of Article 140 of the Constitution, paragraphs 1st and 2nd, shows that it begins with the words, the executive authority takes steps, and ends with, not later than the 31st of December in the year 2007. He continued, this period, as stated in the constitutional text, imposes an obligation on the executive authority to accomplish its task during the period and not to drop the article. That is, if the executive authority lags in the completion of this constitutional task, will be subject to accountability in accordance with the mechanisms provided for in the Constitution. Sharif stressed that the omission of an article in the Constitution means that we are making an amendment to it, and this amendment can be obtained only through the mechanisms provided for in the Constitution itself. He pointed out that the constitutional legislator, if he wanted to exclude Article 140 of the Constitution from the rules of amendment of the Constitution stipulated in its articles, to mention it explicitly, as his intention was clear that the period was designed to oblige the executive authority to a certain task, and that skipping it will make it vulnerable for accounting. Al-Sharif stated, the position of the federal Supreme Court on this matter is not the first of its kind, but it went in the same position in the interpretation of Article 142 of the Constitution by virtue of the number 54 Federal 2017, issued on May 21, 2017 on the mechanisms of amendment to the Constitution. He continued, Article 142, which is also included in the transitional provisions and provides for time limits for amendments, but the court said in its interpretative ruling that that article also remains in force. He added, the same position with respect to Article 137 of the Constitution, which talked about the formation of the Council of the Union, the second wing of the legislative authority, after the end of the first electoral cycle for the years 2006 to 2010, but the federal Supreme Court ruled in many of its judgments this council, even though we are in the fourth electoral cycle now. The summary of the above shows us that exceeding the constitutional deadlines is not intended to drop its articles because this requires an amendment in accordance with the mechanism set forth in the Constitution itself, but to determine the responsibility of the body that is responsible for implementing them, and if they exceed them are held accountable in accordance with the constitutional contexts of the concerned authorities.